So good morning, everybody. Thank you to the organizers, first of all, for this invitation to present our work here at this meeting. My presentation will be dealing mainly with data, and we will be looking mainly at marine data. And this is work that has been a collaboration during the last 5-6 years from different groups from Spain, from CSIC, the Granada University. Myself, I belong to ICTJA here, and Guiomar with the crack from Algeria and Butchol, basically. So I will give you a review of all this data we've been collecting. Much of it has been recently finished, the processing, and we are now in the process of interpreting all this data. So my presentation is going to be focused on the Gibraltar Arc system, and a difference with many other presentations or many other previous studies, we've been working trying to look at this system as a whole. So not only the Alboran basin of the Gulf of Cadiz, but basically the entire system from the larger region here from the Gulf of Cadiz extending into the ocean plate to the Algero-Balearic basin. Well, the interpretation of this region has been, as we heard in the previous presentations, the interpretation of this region has been greatly influenced since the discovery of these tomographic high-velocity anomalies under the peninsula. They've been interpreted as some form of a slab that is hanging down there, and it's been interpreted in many different ways by different groups. And I mean, this is an old paper, but it encapsulates some of these interpretations that involve some kind of east-west subduction with a subducting slab under the Alboran basin, slab break-off with a different direction, and then some other forms of a thickened lithosphere that is being delaminated or removed by some other mechanism. And the other piece of information that we have here is also the seismicity. There is an abundant seismicity, and it's been often been tried to interpret in terms of the geodynamic context of the structure of these basins. So the goal that I have today is to make a review of the work we have done to define the crustal domains of this Gibraltar karst system that gives you an idea of the long-term geological history for this region. And then I will show you as well recent information on active faults and how it relates to historical seismicity. So this is the short-term geological history. And then I will try to convince you that we need two different geodynamic models to explain these different type of long-term and short-term observations for this region. And okay, so much of the data has been collected in the last few years, and in particularly, we had a couple of cruises in 2011. We just finished the processing. This is about 6,000 kilometers of modern MCS data. The green and white, this is the Topo-Med project, part of the Topo-Europe program, and then these 3,000 kilometers of red lines were paid by Repsol, an oil company, in a research project, and now we have the embargo has been finished and we have permission to publish them. So first of all, I'll show you an entire transect of the system here. This white line that goes from the Algero-Balearic basin, Alboran, across the strait into the Gulf of Cadiz. This is a 918 kilometers transect, and we will go through all these different elements to show you how this entire region is composed of very different geological domains. The first line here is a very simplistic structure. Is somewhat the deeper structure is obscured here by the Messinian, very rough salt tectonics, but in general we have a well-defined moho at about 2 seconds, and we think is oceanic crust. This is this line. I will show you this other line that we published a few years ago, going from this oceanic crust from the Algero-Balearic basin into, as we go towards the west, into thicker crust that eventually at the end of the profile is relatively thick. It's about 4 seconds, so it's like 12 kilometers or so. We also have coincident wide-angle seismic data going from the Algero-Balearic all the way into the East Alboran, and we interpret it as this region being basically back arc, oceanic crust, and this region being a heavily intruded arc, continental crust, or even an embryonic volcanic arc in this area. And we also dated the different horizons that overlay this magmatic type of crust, and we concluded that actually the crust in this region has to be something between 6 and 12 million years old or so. So this is the age of formation. We have also modeled these profiles here, and we know pretty well that all this region with the blue colors in bathymetry is actually formed by back arc crust. This is continental domain shown here, and towards the basin we have in all these different lines that this is clearly back arc oceanic crust with a layer 2, layer 3 typical of oceanic crust. In addition, to study the deeper structure, this is the shallow structure of the Alboran Basin. To study the deeper structure, we had a magnetotelluric experiment led by Xavi Garcia from our group with Rob Evans from Woodsole and Marion Jegen from Geomar. And they had some instruments here, 15 sites in 2 deployments for, I think it was something like half a year or so. And this is the model that Xavi passed me, and this is the slab. You see here the coastline of the Iberian Peninsula, North Africa, and under the Eastern Alboran, where we propose that there is this embryonic volcanic arc. They find this very large anomaly here that they conclude that is a very conductive mantle. I mean, we're looking at a different scale. Yeah, this is something like 200 kilometers, I think, in here. So this is a very large anomaly that they conclude that it has to be some form of melt or water, some kind of melt or water in the mantle. Under this area, as I say, that we consider that is magmatic. So when we put all that together, we know also from dredging and studies, geochemical studies, that this is an area in blue of calco-alkaline sosonites. This is thin continental crust, heavily intruded, and in the middle they have found some tholeiitic rocks, which will actually match very well with this concept that in this central area of the Eastern Alboran there is an embryonic volcanic arc. So if we look at that now with multi-channel seismic data, we can look at the tectonic structure of this region. And the interesting thing here, I remember when I started studying this area like 10 years ago, I read this paper from Tony Watts in which he complained he couldn't find faults cut in the basement in this, and that was a strange rifted basin. The reason for this is that there are no faults actually. Most of this crust is magmatic, and when you look in detail, there is basically not normal faulting in this area. So it basically means that this is a volcanic arc that was formed and it died about 6 million years, as the stratigraphy seems to tell us. So it was a volcanic arc. It's not active anymore. This is this is the Moho here, is a multi-channel line cutting one of these topographic heights that we interpret as volcanoes, and actually you can see the nice stratigraphy and how this feature here has actually a very nice apron, probably representative of volcanic activity at the time this arc was active, but it's no longer active anymore. These heights are more or less flat at the top, and they are below sea level. Probably they've been subsiding for the last few million years. The other thing is when we go towards the western area, the West Alboran Basin here, what we have is an incredibly thick pile of sediment up to perhaps 10 kilometers or so in this region, this entire region here, and I show in just one example, and we don't see actually extensional features. So this is like a sinkhole. It's probably a flexural subsidence in the region dominated by the thickening here and the volcanic arc, in which this is all mud volcanism, because it's full of mud with overpressure fluids that are moving in this direction. But basically in the regions we see this subsidence, we don't see extension. So it's a foreland basin with no extension, which matches very well with the concept of a back arc and a fore arc in the region. but it's a forearc which is at the back of the arc. So it is a forearc, and this is the arc, but this is the volcanic arc, and this is a structural arc. We should not be confused about that. So what we conclude is that the East Alboran back arc and arc basin occur between 5-6 million years to perhaps 12 million years or so. So this is the end of the East Alboran activity. And the West Alboran seems to be older in the infill, and it has the structure of a forearc basin. So what we want to study now is this part of the system that a lot of people didn't look at when we were looking at Alboran. So we're going to look at the Gibraltar arc system. This is frontal domains, and this is a lot of new data that is never been presented before, much of it. So we will look at the structure of the structural arc and the Gulf of Cadiz. So just to mention, in the last 2-3 years, we published 2 wide-angle seismic profiles, our group. I will show you this line here that shows that the Gulf of Cadiz from north to south is characterized by a continental crust which is thin, and below it is an oceanic crust which we believe is of Jurassic age. It's a remnant of the Tethys lithosphere. So we use a database. I will not go into great detail now. We've done the stratigraphy in detail of all the region with the help of all the available lines in this area. And I'm going to be showing in the next slide some evidence that these 2 regions are actually 2 margins which are heavily extended, and they have not been described before. So there are probably 2 rifted margins. So first of all, let me show you along this very long transit here that covers the entire region. We will focus in this region here, in this area. This is the next slide at the top. Sorry, it is flipped the orientation. This is the towards the Strait of Gibraltar, and this is this point here. And a close-up of this area is what you see here. You can clearly see this is probably the fleece units which are being thrusted over. There is a nice folding here and some folding here over a region that we call the Gar margin, which is actually very clearly cut by normal faulting. You can see some of them in here. They extending all over this region. I'm just showing a close-up of this area. So this is probably the front. Sorry, here is probably the front of the fleece system that is being very well studied onshore, but is pretty much poorly known in this region around the Strait of Gibraltar. So I will show you a couple of examples. I just showed this line. I'll show you a close-up here, a detail here, and then one more example. This is how it looks. This area of extended terrain, which is cut by numerous normal folds. I think they are pretty clear. Very visible with tilted blocks on top of which the fleece units are overriding. And you may not see it so well, but this is also a series of tilted blocks which are cut by a whole series of normal folds in all this region over here. If we go towards the south, this is what we have called the Kenitra margin in this region here. It is much deeper, is covered by post-rift thick units of sediment, and what you have here is some evidence for diaparism and some tilted blocks in the region. These are diapirs and tilted blocks in this area. So we will go now to one of the other units that composes the entire system. This is the imbricated prism. There's been a lot of debate what this is. It was influenced by the early models of Olistostroms, coming perhaps from the older interpretation of the Apennines. Now we believe this is not a gravitational deposited unit. It's huge. This is a volume that you could not explain coming from this area. It's a very, very large unit. And I will show you the internal structure on that north-south profile in here. It's this line here, and then you have this box and this box. This is this box here, and you can see the end of this unit thrusting over the continental margin of the Gulf of Cadiz, south of Iberia. And the unit extends and extends, and it dies off in this region here towards the south. And below this unit you have a very nice thick pile of sediment that is being underthrusted and is little deformed. This is one other example of the unit, and in the southern region in which we see this unit that is being thrusted over the older continental, probably continental rifted margin in this area. This is the base of the unit. These are some underthrusted sediment, and the entire unit is thrusting towards the front. This is one close-up that you can see how this imbricated body actually dies off and is covered in all this region by very little deformed, more recent sediment, indicating that this unit is dead. This is not a body that is growing in this region, basically. And this is one other example, very similar. The prism is dead, basically. And then for the conceptual model, I'm showing you this extension here in which the imbricated wedge comes into this region in which we have seen this, I call him rifted margin here. I'm not sure, it's an extended terrain that acts as a backstop, and the whole system is a bit complicated because there is quite a bit of diaparism in the region that you see cutting through the surface in this area here. But this is the imbricated wedge, and this is a unit that has nothing to do with the imbricated wedge in here and nothing to do with the fleece system towards the east. Finally, one more example to try to convince you. This is this very long regional profile up there. You see it from near the coast all the way into the abyssal plains. The blue here is this system of imbricated thrust, very nice, and probably out of sequence thrusting, thickening the entire pile, and very well defined, downgoing, little deformed sediment under the pile. If we look at the front, what we see is that this system dies off in this region here with no evidence of deformation. So it is not growing either toward the front. This is not an active system, it's an accretionary system that stopped several million years ago. So we have consistent stories. The back arc stopped 5-6 million years ago, and the frontal units of the Gibraltar arc system also stopped a few million years ago. Yeah? Sorry, this is a close-up of what I was telling you, that this is this imbricated body that is being covered by fully undeformed sediment. So now if we put this together along this transect that you saw before, we can put names to all these different units, and I think what arises is a picture that will be familiar for people looking at geodynamical systems, in which we have a back arc in the Algero-Balearic Basin, a volcanic arc in the East Alboran Sea, and a fork basin, the West Alboran Sea, an orogenic wedge with the structural arc. This is the Straits of Gibraltar, that is riding over this extended margin, which is a backstop to an accretionary prism, which is being underthrust by sediment and oceanic crust. So this is, I think, a very nice example. I'm still not sure how to interpret this region in here, but it's a very nice example that it looks like a subduction zone in principle. However, my interpretation is that there is, because of this extended margin here in particular, there is no evidence for an east-west system that would explain the structure in the Gulf of Cadiz in here. My interpretation is that east-west subduction of an extended lithosphere has not existed in this area. If there was something, it's been very, very limited in time, given this embryonic volcanic arc, and perhaps we have to think something which is more like a combination of subduction with some kind of slab retreat in this direction. So it's not a simple east-west subduction system, what I mean. So the conclusions that I have is that the Gibraltar arc system is formed by back arc, volcanic arc, fore arc, an orogenic wedge, an extended margin, and accretionary system. The special distribution of the units that form the basin structure is similar to subduction zone systems. The main crustal units probably form related to some kind of eastward directed subduction, but not proper subduction like in the Pacific, and with the formation of bark arc oceanic crust and volcanic arc like 5 to 12 million years. This process is finished like 4 or 5 million years ago. However, even though this geodynamic system has been active for a time, we know that there is a lot of seismicity in this region, and we've been looking at that too. And what we found is that the entire area is cut by numerous active faults, but these faults don't really define a pattern that we could link it easily to these crustal domains that we have seen in the first part of the presentation. Something else is going on here, basically. We have a lot of thrusting, strike slip here, large strike slip faults, a lot of extension in this region, and so the entire region is being deformed at very slow rates. So I can show you just a couple of examples to illustrate it. The Yusuf system is a very large strike slip fault system that has been active in the last 4 or 5 million years, or the Alboran Ridge here, which is a major structure that extends at least up to here, and now we think extends in this direction as well, with faulting and folding here. This is an example of this, the Tofinho bank here, which shows actually a very important amount of uplift, with all this sediment have been uplifted by a considerable amount in this region here, whereas this region actually shows, as I mentioned before, no evidence for active faulting. And if we go to the Gulf of Cadiz, we find a relatively similar situation in which there are lots of faults, but there is no really full agreement on which faults are active and which faults are not active, and which system is currently developing. We have this very large strike slip system here. There is some evidence for thrusting, but there are also many thrust systems that don't seem to be active in this very moment. So probably the easiest way, the simplest way to explain all these systems that we see of active faulting is that they are related to the convergence between Iberia and Africa, and they are not related to any subduction type of geodynamics that may have formed the crustal domains that we do see in the region. So the conclusion is that major currently active structures, they are not related to established subduction, that the deformation is distributed over a large number of structures. Everybody knew that, but the major thrust front, shortening and associated transfer structures occur in North Africa. In Iberia is far more distributed, so here seems to be a localization, a focusing of the deformation, and the ongoing localization of the formation in the Gulf of Cadiz is less well understood. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cesar, for all these beautiful images. Questions here?
You sort of seem to be underplaying the current activity to some extent. You're saying most of the geology you're seeing there is old stuff. My recollection is that there was a fairly deep earthquake, I mean, sort of 500, 600 kilometers underneath the region just west of, I think, Granada, right, or east of Granada, in the Granada area. And then we got the Great Lisbon earthquake. I mean, now look at the seismicity. I mean, what you're showing geologically from the seismic sections doesn't seem to match this amazing seismicity with what you're seeing. Can you say something about the Great Lisbon and then something about this very deep earthquake? I'm concerned because I live there.
Okay, the deep earthquake, I think, is, I mean, there is the very, very old story at the beginning of the plate tectonic revolution that there was this big earthquake and everybody was postulating different ideas because there was not clear subduction zone here. Now I think it seems most people will think that occurred within this cold slab that is hanging under Iberia, basically in this region here, similar to this earthquake that Torsten has been mentioning in his presentation. So it's a very deep interslab earthquake down there. So it's maybe dehydration or phase change or something going on in this lithosphere, which is of continental or oceanic origin, and is still, I think, under debate. And the other thing is the 1755 Lisbon earthquake, that it has a question mark here. This has been the topic of many, many different projects. It's still an open question, but this links a little bit with what we have in this slide, which is this entire region with very different, I didn't go into the details, but this is exhumed mantle here, this is exhumed mantle, this is oceanic crust of Jurassic age, this is oceanic crust of Jurassic to Cretaceous age. So there is a whole series of domains that are being reactivated. And that means that we have very old lithosphere, 180 million years old. So the elastic thickness is going to be 60 kilometers. And this is being reactivated by earthquakes now. It's very different to subduction zones in which the big earthquakes occur at 30, 20 kilometers depth. Here, the thrust earthquakes in this region here, they occur at 50, 60 kilometers. So we have a very different geodynamic context, and that's part of the problem why the fault that caused the earthquake has not yet been recognized, or at least there is not an agreement. There are many different ideas, but there is no agreement which fault caused Lisbon earthquake. The good news is that piloseismology, taking turbidites cores from these regions here, they say that only occurs every 2,000 or 3,000 years. So we have a couple of thousand years to go.
There was a Lisbon earthquake 200 years before the Great Lisbon earthquake of probably similar magnitude. And we're talking about 8.4. And this is not some little thing here. This is in today's environment, 8.4 earthquakes occur mostly on subduction complexes.
That's right. That's right. But this is a unique geodynamic setting, basically. You are initiating subduction here, probably. This is the beginning of the formation of a new plate boundary. The old plate boundaries are stopped, basically.
I'm getting confused as your interpretation here, though, because I thought you were saying that this was stopping 4 or 5 million years ago. Are you saying that this is a new system now that's starting?
Yeah.
Because I'm with Alan here. I mean, is this really a subduction zone or is it not? And I would. You keep saying that these are inactive structures that are not breaking the seafloor, but in fact, if you're having recurrence times of several thousand years and high sedimentation rates, that's very difficult conclusion to make, is it not?
What I'm saying is that there is a volcanic arc, there is a forearc basin, there is a Gibraltar arc, a structural arc, the accretionary prism, the back arc. This is a structure that was formed from 5 to 12, 14 million years ago. When you look at the multi-channel data in detail, there is no tectonic activity that relates to that structure. They are more or less dead. You can see that there is no rift wedges or things like this. Now, what we have is a whole series of faults, like these faults cutting through here, which they don't seem to be related to the processes that form this particular spatial sequence of geological domains. These faults in here, they seem to be now related to the convergence between Africa and Iberia, basically. In other words, that the slab which is hanging here is probably not driving the geodynamics in the region, which probably did it 5 to 10 million years ago. That would be my interpretation.
But how does that relate to the Gulf of Cadiz? Because if this is forearc, back arc, this should be much more related to the Gulf of Cadiz slab, not the one that's under southern Iberia.
This oceanic crust that you have here probably extends and links to the slab which is hanging under Iberia. So now we know for the first time that this is oceanic. There was a doubt before whether it was continental crust, extended continental crust. The wide-angle data that I show shows clearly that under the prism there is a Jurassic age oceanic slab that probably extends and links to the slab which is hanging under Gibraltar arc. That's the... Still, it's a pretty particular system because the slabs are teeny tiny and there hasn't been a sustained process for a long time. It's been relatively short-lived.